Imagine yourself on a cold and misty morning in early 17th century England. The sun struggles to rise behind heavy clouds. The thatched rooftops glisten with moisture from the night's fog. The lanes between cottages are thick with mud. The air is heavy, damp, and tinged with the faint scent of wood smoke. This is a land ruled as much by fear as by law. Fear of disease, fear of famine, fear of one's neighbor, and fear of unseen forces at work in the world. It is a time when belief in witchcraft is as real to the common man as the soil beneath his feet. A curse, an ill-omened glance, a sick child, a failed harvest, such events are not misfortunes to be accepted, but signs of malefic intent. And in this world of uncertainty, one figure walks a fine and dangerous line between justice and fanaticism. The witch hunter. Tonight, we invite you to step quietly into the shoes of a 17th century witch hunter. A man driven not by personal glory, but by duty, paranoia, and the grim weight of his calling. His life is filled with suspicion, long days of travel, and dark nights spent interrogating those accused of consorting with the devil. As you settle into your pillow, let your mind drift back in time. Listen and picture this world where shadows seem to whisper and every creaking floorboard might hide a threat. A world in which fear can consume both hunter and hunted. We begin our story in the chill of an underground chamber, interrogating the accused in a cold cellar. The cellar is stone, ancient, and damp. The faint, sour smell of mildew lingers in the air. Rough-hewn steps lead down from the magistrate's hall above, the echo of boots on stone fading as the heavy door closes. Candles flicker weakly against the podium, their light catching on iron shackles fastened to the walls. The room is windowless, the only ventilation a narrow slit cut near the ceiling. The hunter descends slowly, the solace of his boots scraping the stone with each deliberate step. On the far wall, hunched in the shadows, sits the accused. Her clothing is plain, her hair loose and unkempt, eyes sunken from sleeplessness and fear dart toward the hunter. She has been here for 2 days now, pulled from her cottage on the word of a neighbor. The accusation, causing the sickness of a child through witchcraft. The evidence, a crook twig and a charm found beneath the child's cradle. The hunter carries no weapons, only a leather satchel heavy with parchment, ink, and the worn copy of the Malleus Maleficarum that he consults like a priest would a Bible. The burden of proof lies not with the hunter. The task at hand is not to discover innocence, but to extract a confession. The method is simple. Words first, force second. The hunter sets his tools on a nearby table, unrolls a fresh sheet of parchment, and lowers himself onto a stool. He begins with the voice of a weary confidant, calm, patient. He asks her name, her age, her family, how long she has lived in the village. The questions are gentle at first, drawing her into conversation, lowering her guard. But they soon take on a different tone. Have you been seen with herbs of strange appearance? Have you spoken with animals as if they understood your words? Have you cursed your neighbors? Each denial brings a slight tightening of his jaw. Each hesitation is carefully noted. The hunter does not shout. He does not rage. It is the steadiness of his gaze, the tireless nature of his questions that wear away at the accused. Time is his ally. He will return again and again, day and night, until her mind is clouded by exhaustion and dread. Sleep will not come easily in this place, not with the cold pressing in from every stone, nor with the whispered prayers of others accused echoing faintly from unseen adjoining chambers. The hunter knows what the villagers expect. They want resolution, reassurance that justice is being done. The magistrate above wants results to justify the coin he pays. Failure is not an option. A false confession is better than none. And so the questions continue, their edges sharper with each return visit. He speaks of spirits and familiars, of sabbats in the forest, of dark pacts signed in blood. He tells her that confession will ease her suffering, that it will save her soul. Days blur. Hunger gnaws. The accused grows weaker, more confused. Her denials falter. In the quiet hours between interrogations, when her mind drifts in a fog of fatigue, the hunter's words echo within her. Was that shadow a trick of the eye or something more? Did the illness begin after she quarreled with her neighbor? Doubt creeps in, insidious as the damp in the stones. One morning, as pale light filters faintly through the slit high above, the hunter returns. He leans close, voice low and measured. Again, he asks the names of the spirits. Again, he asks what deeds were done beneath the waxing moon. Her lips tremble. The line between truth and fear has worn thin. When she speaks, the words are halting, barely above a whisper. Yes, she met with others. Yes, she called on spirits. Yes, she sought their aid. The hunter's quill scratches across the parchment, recording each broken sentence. It is not the truth that matters now. It is the confession, the proof that the town's fears were not unfounded. The hunter's work in this cellar is nearly done. In the days that follow, the confession will be read aloud in the magistrate's court. The villagers will gather, some fearful, others eager for the spectacle. The hunter will stand beside the magistrate, a silent figure in dark garb. His face will betray no satisfaction, only weariness. There are always more accusations, more names whispered in the dark. His task is endless. And so the cellar door will close once more, awaiting the next frightened soul drawn into its shadows. Now, let us leave this cold chamber for a moment and follow the hunter beyond the village. The life of a witch hunter is not spent in one place. The road calls, with all its dangers and discomforts. As the cellar door creaks closed behind the departing magistrate, a heavy silence returns to the chamber. The hunter lingers a moment longer, gathering his satchel and notes, his gaze flickering once more to the woman now slumped in her chains. There is no triumph in his heart, only a hollow fatigue that clings to him more stubbornly with each passing year. He knows that her confession will not bring peace to the village, nor will it quiet the superstitions that swirl like mist through the streets. If anything, it may only feed the hunger for more names, more accusations, more trials. He ascends the narrow stair, boots echoing in the stairwell. Above, the hall is beginning to stir with the morning's business. The magistrate's scribe sharpens his quill. The bailiff exchanges whispers with a constable. Word has already begun to spread. The hunter allows himself a sip of watered ale to wet his dry throat before stepping outside. The village greets him with a grim, familiar scene. Thin-lipped women watch from doorways, pulling shawls tighter about their shoulders. Children peer from behind their mothers' skirts, wide-eyed and curious. Men gathered in twos and threes mutter amongst themselves. They do not approach the hunter. There is respect in their silence, but also fear. To speak too freely to such a man is to court suspicion, best to remain distant. The hunter has learned to navigate this wary dance. He accepts the cool gazes and unspoken words. It is part of the life he has chosen, or perhaps the life that chose him. Years ago, when famine and sickness claimed his own village, he saw firsthand how fear of unseen forces could twist the hearts of ordinary folk. He remembers the accusations hurled against an old widow, the whispered prayers, the desperate search for someone to blame. It was then that he first sought the wisdom of the Malleus Maleficarum, convinced that understanding the enemy was the path to salvation. Now, armed with parchment, ink, and the authority of the magistrate, he walked from village to village, a solitary figure in a land gripped by suspicion. His presence is both a balm and a threat. For some, he offers hope that through his efforts, evil might be rooted out. For others, he embodies the very fear they dread, a man who can turn lives upside down with a mere question. As he moves through the muddy streets, his mind turns to the confession he has just obtained. There will be a public reading, perhaps a trial if the magistrate deems it necessary. The villagers will come, their eyes eager for spectacle, their hearts hardened by fear. He knows well how quickly a crowd can be swept up in fervor. He has seen it before, cheers at a hanging, jeers at the condemned, the uneasy thrill of watching justice. or what passes for it, unfold before their eyes. Yet for all the certainty he projects, doubt gnaws at the edges of his mind. Were her words truly her own, or the product of exhaustion and despair? Had he led her to them, shaping her answers with each carefully framed question? Such thoughts cannot be allowed to linger. The hunter has a duty, one he cannot question too deeply, lest it consume him. He pauses by the edge of the village, where his horse waits. The creature snorts softly, sensing its master's mood. The hunter strokes its mane, gaze drifting to the distant hills. There is always another village, another summons. His satchel is packed, his tools ready, and so, with a final glance back at the place where fear has once again claimed its due, he mounts and rides toward the next chapter in his grim vocation. The road ahead is long and uncertain, a lonely path marked by suspicion and solitude. In our next segment, we will follow the hunter on these dusty roads, through hostile villages and dark forests, as we explore the life of a man forever chasing shadows. Chapter 2. The road stretches ahead, winding through low hills and tangled woods. The witch hunter leans forward in the saddle, cloak pulled tight against the wind. The village he has just left fades into the distance behind him. He keeps his eyes on the path. He knows better than to trust the quiet of the countryside. There is always some hidden threat, if not from the people, then from the road itself. The work of a witch hunter is not spent behind desks or court benches. It is work done in motion, on the move, day after day. Letters from magistrates, whispered rumors in taverns. Even anonymous notes slipped beneath a church door. These are the calls that send him across the land. No village is too small, no hamlet too remote. Wherever fear takes root, he is sent to dig it out. Travel is a lonely thing. No one rides beside him. He does not bring a servant or an assistant. Such help would only invite suspicion. The people must see him as apart from them, untouched by local ties. Trust must be carefully managed. Too friendly, and he risks looking partial. Too cold, and no one will speak to him at all. He has learned to strike a delicate balance, polite, professional, distant. His days follow grim rhythm. Rise early, tend to his tired horse, pack his few belongings, and ride. The roads are unforgiving. Mud in the spring, dust in the summer, ice come winter. There are no smooth stones, no tidy milestones to guide him. He must rely on old maps, crude directions, and the occasional kindness of a roadside farmer. The inns along the way are rarely welcoming. The hunter has long since grown used to the way voices drop when he enters a room. Conversations die, mugs are lowered, faces turn away. No one wishes to be seen too close to such a man. His presence means trouble. It means questions. And worse, it might mean someone in their midst is about to face accusations no one dares to speak aloud. At night, in unfamiliar towns, the hunter finds what rest he can. Sometimes a drafty room above a tavern. Other times, a stable or an abandoned chapel. He sharpens his quills, reviews his notes, meads again the familiar pages of the Malleus Maleficarum. Its words, once a revelation, now weigh on him with each rereading. The book offers guidance, but no comfort. He carries with him a ledger, worn and stained, where he records each case. Names of the accused, details of the evidence, outcomes of the trials. The pages are full, too full. Each entry a reminder of lives turned upside down, of fear given form. The hunter wonders, at times, what the book will look like in a year's time. Or 5, how many more names will it hold? And so he rides. The seasons change, but the work remains the same. Accusations will rise again in the next village. Faces new to him will wear the same expressions of dread and suspicion. Another cellar, another questioning, another life hanging by the thread of his judgment. Ahead, the narrow road curves into the forest. The trees crowd close, their bare limbs scraping the sky. Somewhere beyond, smoke from distant chimneys hints at the next village. Another summons waits there, another tale of strange happenings and whispered fears. The hunter presses on, knowing that his arrival will bring both relief and dread. In the next chapter, we will turn to one of the most infamous trials of this dark chapter in history, where the hunter's work reached a fever pitch. The Pendle Witch trials. The village ahead comes into view as the trees thin. Low stone cottages with mossy roofs huddle along crooked lanes. A single church tower rises above them, its bell long silent. Smoke drifts from a few chimneys. The witch hunter's approach does not go unnoticed. A pair of children at the edge of the road freeze when they see him, then scurry away. A farmer pauses at his plow, squinting through the morning mist. Already, the whispers will begin. He is here? Another inquiry, another name to be called into question. The hunter rides past shuttered windows and wary faces. Outside the tavern, a group of men lower their voices and step aside. No one greets him, no one offers a hand. He dismounts before the magistrate's house, a squat stone building with iron hinges on its heavy door. The constable, already alerted, steps forward stiffly and leads the hunter inside. There is little ceremony. A brief nod from the magistrate, a muttered word of thanks. Then the grim business begins. The hunter unpacks his satchel, spreads his papers across the worn oak table. Reports of strange lights seen in the woods. A young woman's sudden fits and wild speech. Livestock gone barren, milk spoiled. The signs, the patterns are all too familiar. He listens carefully as the local officials recount the events. Each word weighed, each accusation measured. The villagers, too, will be heard. Fear sharpens their memories, makes them eager to speak. Old grudges resurface, buried jealousies take voice. The hunter has seen it before. How quickly one complaint can turn into a chorus. A quarrel over a patch of land, a disagreement at market, all it takes to set suspicion alight. Once the stories are gathered, the hunter moves through the village. He watches. He listens. He notes who avoids his gaze and who speaks too freely. A single glance can tell much. Behind each closed door, there are secrets. He does not judge hastily. To accuse wrongly is to risk angering the magistrate, to bring doubt upon his own skill. But to overlook a true threat, that would be worse. In the dim light of late afternoon, the questioning begins. A young woman, trembling and pale, is brought before him. Her neighbors speak of odd habits, of herbs gathered by moonlight, of muttered words. The hunter asks simple questions at first. Her name, her family, her work. Slowly, the questions turn sharper. Why gather herbs at night? What words were spoken over this sick child? Has she consorted with spirits? The woman's answers falter. Her voice breaks. The hunter watches for the signs: hesitation, fear, guilt, or an innocence masked by terror. It is not always easy to tell. He presses on, gently at first, then with growing firmness. The truth, he reminds her, will ease her soul. A confession will bring mercy. The hours stretch long, the room grows colder. Outside, the sky darkens. Candles sputter in their holders. The hunter's voice remains calm, relentless. The young woman's resolve begins to crack. Her gaze falls to the floor. She speaks of strange dreams, of shapes in the night, of an old woman who taught her charms. The hunter writes each word carefully, the quill scratching softly on the parchment. By morning, the confession is complete. The magistrate will be pleased. The village will believe the danger has been faced. But the hunter knows better. Each accusation, each confession feeds the fear. There will be more. There are always more. He prepares to move on. Another letter waits. Another village stirs with whispers. The lonely road calls him back. The hunter mounts once more, cloak drawn tight, eyes fixed on the path ahead. The weight of his work grows heavier with each passing mile. Now we turn to one of the darkest episodes of this age, a trial where fear and superstition reach new heights. The Pendle Witch Trials. Chapter 3. The Pendle Witch Trials remain one of the most infamous witch hunts in English history. A case where old fears and new tensions collided, and where the full machinery of accusation, confession, and trial ground many lives to dust. It was the year 1612 in the rolling hills of Lancashire. The land was rough, dotted with small farms and dense woods. The people here were poor, life hard. In such places, suspicion found fertile ground. Old beliefs about witchcraft and spirits ran deep. Though England was changing new laws, new faiths, many in the countryside still whispered of charms and curses, of secret gatherings on lonely hillsides. The story began, as these tales often did, with a single encounter. A young woman, Alison Device, cursed a peddler after a quarrel. Soon after, the man fell ill. Word spread quickly. The local magistrate, Roger Noel, took notice. A formal inquiry began. The Devices were known in the area, poor, isolated, and feared by some. For years, neighbors had traded stories about the family's strange ways and sharp tongues. The hunter, called to assist, arrived in the shadow of Pendle Hill. He listened as accusations poured forth, not just against Alison, but against her mother, Elizabeth Device, and her grandmother, known as Demdike. Soon, other names were added: neighbors, rivals, even members of another family, the Chattoxes. Old grievances surfaced: land disputes, arguments over livestock, illnesses blamed on hidden forces. The hunter recognized the pattern, fear feeding on itself, one accusation opening the door for many more. He worked carefully, questioning each suspect in turn. The records show that Demdike, old and nearly blind, confessed to witchcraft. Her words only fueled the flames. Stories of meetings with the devil, of curses cast on cattle and crops, spread through the village like wildfire. Children, too, were drawn into the proceedings. Young Janet Device, barely 9 years old, testified against her own family. Her clear, steady voice in court carried great weight. The hunter knew well how powerful such testimony could be. A child's words, seen as pure, were difficult to challenge. Even as he recorded her statements, a part of him wondered at the price of such innocence. The prisoners were sent to Lancaster Castle, a grim place of cold stone and iron bars. The hunter accompanied them, his role far from done, in the damp cells. He continued his questioning. The goal was clear: full confessions, detailed accounts of witchcraft and devilry. The suspects, weakened by fear and hunger, spoke of familiars and secret rites. Whether they truly believed their words or simply sought an end to their suffering was often impossible to tell. As the trial date neared, the hunter prepared his notes. The magistrate demanded a clear case. The villagers expected justice. The hunter's own reputation would rest on the outcome. He reviewed the confessions, cross-checked the accusations, and ensured that every word was ready to present before the court. In August of that year, the trial began. The courtroom filled with townsfolk eager to hear the charges. The hunter stood beside the magistrate, his presence a reminder of the seriousness of the proceedings. One by one, the accused were brought forth. Their confessions read aloud, their accusers called to speak. Janet Device's testimony proved decisive. Her words condemned not only her mother and brother, but others as well. The hunter watched as the faces of the accused shifted from defiance to despair. The weight of fear, of public shame, pressed heavily upon them. By the trial's end, 10 were found guilty and sentenced to death. The hunter remained silent as the sentences were passed. There was no celebration, no relief, only the grim knowledge that more accusations would surely follow. Fear was not easily quenched. As he left Lancaster Castle, the hunter paused beneath the looming walls. The air was thick with the scent of damp stone and old sorrow. He mounted his horse and rode on, the road ahead once more calling him into the shadows. Now, let us turn to the strange objects and so-called proofs that so often sealed a person as fate. In our next chapter, we will examine the gathering of evidence, charms, dolls, and devil's marks. The hunter's saddle creaked softly beneath him as he rode on from Lancaster, the grim echoes of the Pendle trial still heavy in his mind. 10 souls had met their fate. The crowd had seen justice done, or so they believed. But in truth, the hunter knew justice had little to do with it. Fear, suspicion, and the hunger for answers had driven those events to their tragic conclusion. And they would again. In village after village, new whispers awaited. Cattle struck dead without reason, bread that would not rise. Children fevered in the night. All of it could be taken as signs of witchcraft if one knew how to read them. And it was the hunter's task to read those signs, to gather the proofs, the objects that would build the case. He kept with him a small chest, worn and scarred from years of use. Within it lay examples of the so-called evidence he had seen over the years. Dried herbs tied with twine, small figures of wax or clay, lengths of knotted cord, bits of bone. Such items, innocent enough in other times and places, could swiftly become proof of guilt when found in the wrong hands. One evening, as he arrived at a low stone cottage on the edge of a moor, the hunter was met by a frightened widow. Her sheep had died suddenly. Her milk had turned sour. And worse, she claimed, strange trinkets had been found buried near her threshold. Who might wish her harm? Had she quarreled with any neighbors? The answers came readily. A woman down the lane, older, sharp-tongued, known to dabble in herbs. The pattern was all too familiar. One neighbor's misfortune soon became another's accusation. He rode that evening to the accused woman's home, a sagging cottage near the woods. There, among her few belongings, he found a small bundle of roots, a pouch of dried berries, and beneath a loose floorboard, a carved figure wrapped in cloth. Whether these things had been planted by another, or were truly her own, mattered little. They were evidence now. The search for a devil's mark was another tool in the hunter's craft. It was believed that witches bore a mark upon their flesh, some sign of their pact with dark forces. A mole, a scar, a patch of discolored skin. Any blemish might serve. The hunter had seen many such searches. The accused stripped bare, their bodies examined by magistrates or hired searchers. A birthmark that had gone unnoticed for years could suddenly spell doom. More troubling were the marks found on animals. A cat with a torn ear, a dog with a strange patch of fur, livestock bearing odd injuries. These two were taken as signs of familiars, demonic spirits in animal form. The hunter had recorded such cases, always careful to document what was seen, what was claimed. He knew the dangers of false evidence. He had seen jealous neighbors plant charms to frame a rival. He had heard of old women marked by years of toil, mistaken for signs of witchery. Yet, in the fevered atmosphere of a frightened village, caution often lost out to certainty. It was his task to balance these forces, though he wondered more often of late, whether such balance was even possible. One cold autumn morning, called to a market town plagued by illness, the hunter oversaw the search of a suspected witch's home. In a soot-blackened hearth, a hidden cavity was discovered. Within lay bones, charred and brittle, wrapped in tattered cloth. The villagers recoiled in horror. To them, it was proof beyond doubt. The hunter recorded the find, noting each detail. But as he looked upon the remains, doubt stirred. Were these human bones? Animal? An old burial disturbed by chance? Such questions mattered little now. The court would not ask them. And so the cycle continued. Each charm, each doll, each mark served to feed the growing fear. The hunter carried his findings to the magistrate, knowing that the decision of guilt or innocence would soon rest on such fragile evidence. As he rode on to his next summons, the hunter could not shake a growing unease. The tools of his trade meant to root out evil too often seemed to sow more of it. But there was no turning back. The road awaited. The hunt continued. Next, we will look more closely at the book that guided so many of these grim investigations. The infamous Malleus Maleficarum. Chapter 4. The hunter's path often led him to places where the line between truth and belief grew faint. In such places, he leaned heavily on a book known to every man of his trade. The Malleus Maleficarum, the Hammer of Witches. A work that shaped not only his methods, but the very way fear was given form and structure in the minds of those he served. First published in 1487, the book had by now seen countless copies carried from town to town, its pages worn thin by the touch of anxious fingers. The hunter's own copy was no exception. Bound in cracked leather, the corners softened from years of travel. He kept it close, for it was both shield and weapon, a guide through the tangled thickets of accusation and doubt. The Malleus claimed to offer clear truths about witchcraft, its origins, its dangers, and its signs. For men like the hunter, it provided a framework for understanding the evil they believed was at work around them. Within its pages were instructions on identifying witches, extracting confessions, and recognizing the influence of the devil. It warned that witches, though often women, could be found among men as well, that they moved unseen through communities, sowing illness, infertility, and death. On quiet nights, alone by a sputtering fire, the hunter would turn its pages slowly, the flickering light casting shifting shadows across the dense Latin text. The words, once clear and certain, seemed now to echo with darker meaning. The book urged vigilance, even suspicion. It cautioned that no outward sign of piety or goodness could be trusted, for witches were skilled in deception. Yet with each reading, the hunter felt a gnawing doubt. The book's certainty was at odds with the tangled reality he encountered in village after village. The accused were often poor, often old, often powerless. Their supposed crimes lacked clear cause. Their confessions, when they came, were shaped by fear, hunger, and exhaustion. Could so much evil truly dwell among such broken souls? Still, the hunter followed its counsel. To do otherwise was unthinkable. The Malleus carried the weight of authority, quoted by magistrates and priests alike. It lent legitimacy to his work. When confronted by doubters, he need only point to its pages. Its words were not his alone, but those of learned men who had faced the same dark forces. The book offered detailed lists of signs to watch for: sudden storms, the blighting of crops, animals born with deformities, unexplained sicknesses. It warned that witches could fly, could consort with demons, could curse with a glance or a whispered word. No event was too small to be linked to their supposed powers. And once linked, the stain of suspicion was difficult to wash away. The Malleus also gave instructions for extracting the truth. It described the use of torture, justified in cases where the devil's hand was suspected. For the hunter, this was the most troubling of its teachings. In the cold chambers of the magistrate's cells, he had seen what fear and pain could do to the mind. He knew that under such strain, the truth often slipped away, replaced by desperate inventions. Yet, the book urged that the ends justified the means. A confession, even one drawn from agony, was seen as proof of guilt and a blow struck against the forces of darkness. The hunter carried this knowledge with him, always. Each time he entered a new village, each time he faced a new accusation, the teachings of the Malleus weighed upon his decisions. It was both guide and burden, shaping not only how he worked, but how he saw the world. He was not alone in this. Across England, across much of Europe, men and women of the law relied on the book's grim wisdom. Its reach was vast, its influence deep, and for many it offered a way to make sense of the chaos and fear that seemed to seep from every shadow. But in the heart of the hunter, doubts remained, as he packed away the worn volume and prepared once more to ride. He wondered, was he truly serving justice, or merely feeding a hunger for scapegoats and simple answers? The road ahead would not bring clarity. Only more questions, more fears, and the endless work of rooting out an evil that might never truly be seen. In our next chapter, we will explore how the pulpit, the voice of the church, fueled these fears, turning suspicion into certainty. The hunter often thought about the power of words. Words could comfort, or they could inflame. They could settle a troubled mind or set a village to panic. Nowhere was this more true than in the sermons delivered from the pulpit. The church was the beating heart of every village. Its bell called the people to prayer. Its stone walls offered refuge. Its teaching shaped how men and women saw the world and how they judged one another. Sunday after Sunday, beneath wooden beams darkened by smoke and age, the villagers gathered on rough benches. The hunter had sat among them many times. He knew well the rhythm of those sermons, the low murmur of the minister's voice rising to sharp warnings, the trembling silence that followed. The words spoke of sin and salvation, of temptation and judgment, and increasingly of witches. In troubled times, when crops failed or disease spread, the minister's words grew harder. They spoke of the devil's hand in the affairs of men. They warned of unseen enemies at work within the community. The people listened, their fears given voice and shape. A cow's sudden death, a child's wasting illness, these were no longer random misfortunes. They were signs, warnings, proof that dark forces moved among them. The Malleus Maleficarum encouraged this view. Its pages urged the clergy to speak boldly of witchcraft, to awaken the faithful to its dangers. And many ministers did so with zeal. The hunter heard their sermons, saw their effects. Afterward, the villagers would murmur among themselves, exchanging glances, recalling old grudges and strange events. The hunter knew that in the days to follow, names would be whispered to the magistrate. Suspicion, once sown, grew quickly. In one village, he recalled, a new minister had arrived, young, fiery in speech. His sermons were fierce, full of warnings about the devil's servants. The hunter arrived to find a town already aflame with fear. Neighbors accused one another. Children pointed trembling fingers. Within days, the magistrate's hall was full of the accused. The hunter worked through the cases, but beneath it all he saw the same root. Words spoken from the pulpit. Words that gave the people license to see evil where none might truly exist. Not all ministers were so quick to fan the flames. Some, older and more cautious, urged restraint. They counseled that misfortune was part of life, not always a sign of wickedness. But such voices were too often drowned out. Fear was louder, and in villages hungry for answers, It was the darker sermons that drew the greatest crowds. The hunter could not deny the usefulness of this fear. It opened doors, loosened tongues. A frightened community was more willing to accept his presence, to believe his findings. Yet it troubled him. He had seen too many lives ruined by rumor alone. A careless word from the pulpit could destroy a household. A single fiery sermon could set a whole town to trembling. Still, the hunter did not speak against it. To do so would be to question the very authority that gave him his role. He carried out his work with care, seeking what truth he could, in a fog of fear and faith. But he never forgot the power of the pulpit, nor the danger of words spoken with too much certainty. In the coming weeks, the hunter would face darker duties still, for in some places words alone were not enough. The next step was action grim, brutal, and often irreversible. It was here that the true darkness of his trade revealed itself, in the cold, echoing chambers where confessions were torn from unwilling lips. In our next chapter, we will enter that place. The screams of the rack room. Chapter 5. The hunter had long since learned to mask his feelings. He had to. The work demanded it. Yet even he could not step into certain places without a tightening of the chest, a coldness in the stomach. The rack room was one such place. A chamber set apart, where the true cost of fear was measured not in words, but in broken bodies and shattered minds. These rooms were rarely grand. A low ceiling, thick stone walls, a single iron ring door. The air always seemed colder inside, damp, stale, heavy with the scent of sweat and old despair. In the center stood the instruments of persuasion, the rack itself, its wooden frame darkened with age, the ropes rough and unyielding. Along the walls, other tools awaited, the thumb screw here, iron manacles there, each designed to draw out the truth when softer methods failed. The hunter did not take such work lightly. He knew well what was written in the Malleus, that the use of force was justified, when the evidence pointed to guilt, but the accused remained silent. Yet in his heart he knew that once pain entered the room, truth often fled. Fear twisted words, reshaped memories. A desperate person would say anything to make it stop. Still, the demands of his trade left little room for such doubts. The magistrate expected results. The villagers, too, on assurance that their fears were not unfounded. And so, when questioning and persuasion yielded no confession, the hunter would give the order. The accused would be brought to the rack room. It was not always the physical pain that broke them first. The waiting, the knowledge of what was to come, weighed heavily. The accused would sit in the dark, hearing the scrape of metal, the whispered commands of the guards. The hunter's voice, calm and deliberate, would echo off the stone, confess, and this need not go further. Some broke then, tears streaming, words tumbling forth. Others held out longer. And when they did, the rack would be prepared. The accused, trembling, would be fastened in place. The ropes tightened, inch by inch, as joints strained, muscles screamed. The hunter stood watch, notebook in hand, recording each word, each change in expression. He often wondered what the villagers imagined happened in these rooms. They heard whispers, of coarse screams in the night, the limp bodies carried out. But few knew the true nature of what took place. Nor, he suspected, did many wish to know. It was easier to believe that evil had been exposed and dealt with, that the darkness had been purged. In one case, the hunter remembered a young man, barely more than a boy, accused of bewitching the local baker's daughter. The evidence was thin, a string of coincidences and bitter words. The boy denied all charges. Days of questioning yielded nothing. The magistrate, under pressure from the townsfolk, ordered the rack prepared. The hunter watched as the boy's resolve crumbled. The first turn of the wheel brought gasps, the second, cries. By the third, words spilled forth, names, deeds, pacts that may or may not have existed. The hunter wrote it all down, even as his own doubts gnawed at him. Would this confession satisfy the court? Certainly. Would it ease the fears of the town? Perhaps. But was it true? He could no longer say such moments haunted him. He told himself it was necessary, that without such measures evil would go unpunished. Yet with each passing year, the shadows in his mind grew longer. He had seen too much, heard too many falsehoods drawn from the depths of human suffering. And so he carried on, each new case adding to the burden. In the daylight, he wore the mask of duty. At night, alone by the fire, he read the Malleus again, searching for answers that no longer came. The screams of the rack room echoed in his memory, long after the actual voices had faded. In our next chapter, we step away from the cold stone of the chamber and into a different setting, a place where fear and judgment flowed more freely than ale. Drinking with a local magistrate. The rack room was behind him now for a time. The hunter rode out beneath a heavy sky, the air damp with the promise of rain. His horse's hooves clopped dully against the muddy road, a slow rhythm that matched his weary thoughts. There would be another summons soon enough, another case. But tonight he had been invited to dine. The local magistrate, a man of influence and considerable pride, had extended the offer. It was not unusual. In many towns, the hunter's presence drew curiosity as well as caution. The magistrates who oversaw these cases knew the value of being seen alongside such a figure. It lent weight to their judgments, bolstered their standing in the eyes of the people. And so, after a long day's work, the hunter found himself standing beneath the carved lintel of a prosperous home, brushing road dust from his cloak. Inside, warmth greeted him. A fire snapped in the hearth. Candles flickered on polished wood. The table was laid with bread, cheese, a joint of beef, and most welcome of all, a pitcher of strong ale. The magistrate rose to greet him, one hand on a goblet, the other already gesturing for the hunter to sit. Such evenings followed a familiar pattern. The magistrate eager to share local gossip, to hint at the burdens of office. The hunter replying with measured words, always careful, always polite. A few mugs of ale would pass between them, loosening tongues. The magistrate would lean in, then, voice lower, asking for the hunter's true thoughts. Were these recent accusations sound? Was the fear in the village justified? The hunter chose his words with care. He spoke of patterns seen in other towns, of the signs taught by the Malleus, of the caution required in such matters. And always he let the magistrate believe himself the wiser man, the one making the final judgments. This was part of the dance, part of surviving in a world where missteps could lead to ruin. As the evening wore on, others would join the gathering. Wealthy merchants, minor officials, sometimes even the village priest. They brought their own stories of strange lights in the woods, of cattle sickened without cause, of children taken by sudden fits. The hunter listened, noting the names, the places. Often, these conversations revealed more than any formal inquiry. Behind the ale-fueled talk lay the true heart of the village, its fears, its grudges, its hidden tensions. There was a darkness to these gatherings, beneath the surface cheer, a knowing look here, a sly remark there. The hunter recognized it well. The sense that the next victim had already been chosen in the minds of some at the table. That by morning, new accusations would take shape, strengthened by the magistrate's drink-fueled resolve. He had seen it before. In one town, a careless jest about an old woman's odd habits had, by the next day, become a formal charge. The magistrate, eager to be seen as vigilant, had wasted no time in ordering her arrest. The hunter, arriving too late to prevent it, could only proceed with the grim work expected of him. These dinners served another purpose as well. They reminded the hunter of his own place in the world. For all his learning, for all the authority he carried, he was still an outsider. A tool to be used when convenient, a scapegoat when things went wrong. He had seen hunters ruined when a case ended poorly, when public opinion turned. No friendship, no shared mug of ale could truly shield him. And so he played his part, careful and watchful. He drank, but never too deeply. He spoke, but never too freely. Always mindful that every word, every glance might follow him beyond the walls of the magistrate's hall. As the night wore on and the fire burned low, the hunter took his leave. Stepping out into the chill night air, he drew his cloak tighter. The stars overhead were faint, veiled by drifting clouds. Behind him, laughter still echoed from the hall, but ahead, the road stretched on, uncertain, unforgiving. Chapter 6. The hunter had witnessed many things in his years on the road. The fear in a mother's eyes as their child wasted away. The sharp scent of old stone in the interrogation rooms. The whispered confessions torn from trembling lips. But nothing weighed so heavily on him as the final chapter in the grim story of a witch trial, the public execution. It was a spectacle in the truest sense of the word. Announced days in advance, it drew villagers from miles around. Word spread quickly. A hanging, a burning, a display of justice meant to cleanse the town of its fears. The hunter had often wondered if the executions brought more peace or more dread. But the crowd always came. The morning of such an event would dawn cold and gray or stifling and still, but always heavy with expectation. Merchants set up stalls, hawking bread, ale, and wares to the gathering throng. Children clutched their mothers' hands, wide-eyed, not fully understanding what was to come. Men clustered in small groups, voices low, the weight of anticipation thick between them. The gallows would stand at the edge of town or in the main square if space allowed. A rough platform, tall enough to be seen by all. In cases of burning, a stake would be driven deep into the earth, piled with wood and straw. The hunter, though not one to dwell on sentiment, always felt a certain hollowness when he saw these preparations. The crude finality of it all. He would arrive early, summoned by the magistrate to lend authority to the proceedings. His presence was expected proof that the proper forms had been followed, that the sentence was just. He stood apart from the crowd, his dark cloak marking him as something other than one of them. The villagers gave him a wide berth, a mixture of respect and unease keeping them at a distance. The condemned would be led forth under heavy guard, their faces pale, eyes hollow. Some wept openly, others moved with eerie calm. The hunter had seen both. He knew there was no single way a person faced their end. Sometimes the accused would speak, a final denial, a desperate plea. Sometimes silence, as the noose was fixed or the fire kindled. The crowd would press closer. A strange energy filled the air, equal parts morbid curiosity and grim satisfaction. The hunter wondered often at this. How ordinary men and women who might shun violence in their daily lives could stand so willingly before such a scene. Perhaps it was fear transformed into relief that they themselves were safe. At least for today. When the trap was sprung or the flames rose high, the crowd's reaction would swell. Gasps, shouts, sometimes cheers. Mothers would shield their children's eyes, though they had brought them there of their own will. The hunter watched, face impassive. It was not his role to feel. He recorded the outcome, confirmed the execution had been carried out, and when the task was done, he would quietly take his leave. but the echoes of those moments followed him. On the long ride away from the village, the faces of the condemned would rise in his mind. The accusations, the interrogations, the forced confessions, all leading to that final breath. He told himself that the guilty had met their due. Yet doubt gnawed at him still. Had every case been so clear? Had justice truly been served? In one town, he remembered, a woman of great age had faced the flames. The evidence had been slight, the confession hesitant. Yet the crowd had clamored for her death. Superstition ran deep, and to show mercy was to risk suspicion oneself. The magistrate had given the order. The hunter had borne witness. But as the smoke rose into the sky, he felt no triumph. Only a weary sense of the endless cycle in which he played a part. Public executions were meant to cleanse, to purge evil from the community, but more often they seemed to deepen the fear. In the days that followed, new accusations would arise. New whispers would fill the taverns and market stalls. The hunter knew then that his work would never truly be done. Each village, each trial, each execution only fed the hunger for more. In our next chapter, we will see how that hunger could turn upon the hunter himself. For in this world of shadows and suspicion, no one, not even the hunter, was truly safe. There were days when the hunter wondered how thin the line was between accuser and accused. He had seen it happen more than once. The very tools of suspicion he carried could so easily be turned against him. The villagers he served were quick to trust him when fear gripped them. But fear was fickle. It shifted with the winds of gossip. A single rumor, a stray comment could change everything. The hunter moved from town to town with caution. He chose his words carefully, watched his every step. He knew that in a world ruled by paranoia, even the slightest misstep could be fatal. The man who questioned too sharply, who lingered too long among the accused, could himself become an object of suspicion. His knowledge of witchcraft, once a badge of authority, could just as easily be seen as unnatural. How else, some would whisper, could he know so much of the devil's works? In one village, this danger had struck close. The hunter had arrived after a string of sudden deaths. Livestock perished overnight. A young woman wasted away in her bed. The villagers were wild with fear. The hunter set about his work questioning, gathering evidence. Yet behind the polite words of the magistrate, he sensed unease. The people looked at him with wary eyes. The local priest, once a source of quiet support, grew cold. It began with a single voice. An old farmer, half mad with grief after losing his wife, muttered that the hunter had brought the evil with him, that he knew too much of dark things. The words spread, carried on the wind. Soon others echoed the claim. The hunter heard whispers behind him in the streets, saw doors closed more quickly as he passed. The magistrate, once eager for his help, grew distant. The hunter realized with chilling clarity that the ground beneath his feet was shifting. He left that village sooner than planned, riding hard through the night, but the lesson remained. Even he, armed with the authority of the court and the teachings of the Malleus, was not immune to the tides of fear. The hunter had seen others fall. A fellow inquisitor, known for his zeal, had vanished from public life after a single accusation from a bitter rival. Another had been found dead on the road, the work of villagers too frightened to wait for formal justice. Such cases were rarely recorded in the official ledgers. No magistrate wished it known that their hunter had fallen to suspicion. But the story spread among those who rode the same lonely paths. Warnings passed in low voices by firelight. Be careful. Trust no one. Never linger when the work is done. The hunter learned to heed these warnings. He kept to himself, refused the hospitality of those too eager to offer it. In conversation, he deflected questions about his past, his beliefs. He knew that curiosity, once aroused, could be dangerous. Better to remain a shadow, a figure of grim duty, neither too close nor too distant. Yet the danger was not always external. The hunter felt it growing within him as well. The constant exposure to fear and cruelty wore at the mind. Doubts crept in. Nightmares haunted his sleep. In dark moments, he wondered how different he truly was from those he judged. The line between hunter and hunted seemed ever more fragile. On solitary rides between towns, the hunter found himself looking over his shoulder more often. He trusted his horse more than any man. The familiar weight of his satchel, once a comfort, now felt like a burden. The Malleus, with all its stern certainty, offered little reassurance. The words rang hollow against the shifting truths he encountered daily. Still, he pressed on. To stop was unthinkable. To refuse a summons was to invite questions. And so he rode always forward, always toward the next case. But in his heart, he knew that one day the road might lead not to another accused, but to himself. That was the true price of living in a world where fear ruled all. No one, not even the hunter, was truly safe. In our next chapter, we will explore how false witness and personal grudges often fueled these dark accusations, turning neighbor against neighbor in a deadly game of survival. Chapter 7. The hunter had long understood that evil did not always wear a devil's face. More often, it wore the face of a neighbor. The quiet man down the lane, the woman at market with a sharp tongue, the child who watched too closely. In a world where fear and suspicion ruled, any slight could become a spark. And once lit, the fire spread quickly. False witness was as old as the trials themselves. The hunter had seen it in every town. A farmer angry over a disputed boundary, a merchant jealous of a rival's good fortune, a widow nursing old wounds, all could find in the cry of witch a terrible weapon. The accused might never know why they had been named. The hunter, arriving to investigate, would often sense the undercurrents at once. The way certain eyes refused to meet his, the strained greetings, the too eager words of those with much to gain. In one small village, the hunter recalled a case that had begun with a simple quarrel. Two sisters, once close, had fallen out over inheritance. Harsh words were exchanged. Soon after, one sister's child fell ill. The mother, grief-stricken, whispered of curses. Her story grew with each telling. Neighbors, eager to take sides, added their own claims. Strange herbs seen in the other sister's garden. Odd lights at her window. It was not long before the hunter was called. He arrived to find a community divided. Old grudges surfaced, petty rivalries given new weight. The accused sister denied all charges, weeping in confusion. Yet the testimony against her was steady, practiced. The hunter listened, recorded, asked careful questions. But beneath the surface, he saw the truth. A web of bitterness, spun long before his arrival. Such cases were the hardest. The law required him to act to follow the evidence presented. Yet in his heart, he knew that much of it was born not of true belief, but of vengeance. The hunter did what he could, pressed for details, tested the strength of each claim. At times, he found ways to delay, to cast doubt without open defiance. But in many instances, the tide of fear proved too strong. The machinery of justice ground on, fueled by falsehood and spite. Children, too, could become pawns in these grim games. The hunter had seen it again and again. A frightened child, coached by a parent or elder, could offer damning testimony. A stray remark, twisted and repeated, soon became unshakable truth. In one town, a girl barely 8 years old had accused her own grandmother. The hunter, wary, questioned her gently. Her story faltered under scrutiny. Yet the villagers clung to it. The old woman had long been disliked, her ways considered odd. The child's words gave them permission to act. There were times when the hunter succeeded in exposing such falsehoods. A planted charm uncovered, a witness caught in contradiction. On those rare days, he felt a flicker of purpose, but more often, he found himself trapped within a system that demanded outcomes. To question too much was to risk his own standing. The hunter walked a narrow path, balancing duty against conscience. He kept a private ledger, apart from the official records. In it, he noted the cases that troubled him most. Names, dates, the tangled motives beneath the surface. It was a small act of defiance, a way to bear witness to the truths that went unspoken. As the years passed, the hunter saw how the cycle repeated. One accusation led to another. Each trial, each execution, bred new grudges. The community, far from being cleansed, became more brittle, more divided. Fear lingered in every corner. The hunter wondered, often, if any village truly escaped unchanged. Yet the work continued. Another summons, another road. And always the knowledge that behind every accusation, behind every trembling voice, lay not only fear of the devil, but the darker fears and hatreds of men. In our next chapter, we will see how even the most innocent companions animals could become evidence of guilt in this twisted world. It would have seemed absurd in another time. A cat dozing by the hearth, a blackbird perched on a windowsill, a loyal old dog following its master through the fields. Simple moments of daily life. Yet in this world of fear and suspicion, such sights could take on darker meaning. The hunter had seen it firsthand, how animals, once companions and comforts, could become the very proof of guilt. The belief ran deep. Witches, it was said, did not work alone. They had helpers, familiar spirits given animal form. Cats were the most common, their sleek movements and watchful eyes long associated with mystery, but any creature could be suspect. Toads, mice, birds, dogs, even insects. In the eyes of a frightened village, the ordinary could quickly seem unnatural. The Mali spoke plainly on the matter. Witches were believed to feed these familiars with their own blood, to speak with them in secret tongues. Through them, harm could be done, crops blighted, children sickened, fortunes ruined. A simple scratch behind a cat's ear might, if seen by the wrong eyes, be twisted into proof of dark communion. The hunter approached such claims with caution. He knew how quickly fear could distort perception. In one town, a woman was accused after her neighbors saw a sparrow visit her window each morning. Another was named when her aging dog, blind and lame, was found outside a sick child's home. The hunter questioned carefully, searching for more solid ground. But in many cases, the presence of an animal near an ill event was evident enough for the villagers. He remembered a case from the damp fens of the north. A healer, known for her skill with herbs, kept a white ferret. The creature followed her faithfully, its pale coat standing out against the dark marshes. When a local boy fell ill after gathering reeds, the whispers began. The ferret had been seen near the boy's home. Soon, the healer stood accused. The hunter arrived to find the town divided, some defending her, others certain of her guilt. He examined the evidence, the boy's sickness, the ferret's presence. None of it spoke clearly of witchcraft, yet the people's fear was fierce. They demanded action. The hunter pressed for more testimony, hoping to buy time. In the end, it was the sight of the creature itself, darting through the crowd during the inquiry, that sealed her fate. Cries of familiar rang out. The court condemned her. The hunter left the village with a heavy heart. Such moments haunted him. He had seen animals used as excuses, as targets for hatred. A child's stray remark about a talking bird. A neighbor's jealousy over a fine milk cow. Small things, twisted by fear into tools of accusation. The hunter's own horse, A sturdy bay had once drawn suspicion from an ignorant farmer. A knowing glance, a clever step, was it not the mark of an enchanted beast? The hunter had deflected the claim with humor, but the moment stayed with him. He kept a wary eye in each new town, not just for the accused, but for their animals. He knew that the wrong glance, the wrong word, could condemn them both. He warned those he questioned to be careful, to keep their pets hidden, their words guarded. Yet even this could backfire. Hiding an animal was itself seen as cause for suspicion. There was no safe course, no certain defense. The hunter recorded such cases in his private ledger. Cats stoned by fearful villagers, dogs driven off, birds caged or killed. The cruelty of it weighed on him. These creatures, innocent of any malice, paid the price for human fear. And behind each death, another life was drawn closer to ruin. It was yet another layer to the tangled web he navigated. One more way in which ordinary life could be twisted. One more danger for those already caught in suspicion's grip. The hunter rode on, each new village bringing fresh tales of strange animals and darker meanings. Chapter 8. There were long nights on the road when the hunter wished for nothing more than sleep. A deep, dreamless sleep, free of memory and regret, but such peace rarely came. The longer he worked, the more the weight of his choices seemed to press upon him. And when sleep did come, it brought not rest, but visions. Faces of the condemned, voices raised in protest or despair. The heavy thud of the gallows, the roar of the flames. The hunter was no stranger to hardship. Years on the road had toughened him. His body bore the marks of long rides, rough meals, nights spent beneath open skies. But the mind that was another matter, the mind remembered everything, no matter how he tried to shut it away. At first, when he was new to the work, he had carried a sense of purpose. A belief that he was fighting a necessary battle, protecting the innocent from true evil. The Malleus had spoken plainly. Witches were real. Their threat was great. The hunter believed it. He had to. But time changed things. The more cases he took, the more confessions he heard, the more trials he witnessed, the harder it became to hold on to that certainty. Too many accusations sprang from old grudges, from fear, from petty spite. Too many confessions came from broken men and women, worn down by pain and terror. Doubt crept in, unbidden, and with it came guilt. On dark nights by the fire, alone with his thoughts, the hunter would trace the path of a case from start to finish. The accusation, the questioning, the gathering of evidence, the final sentence. How many of those paths, he wondered, had truly led to justice, and how many had led only to needless suffering? The faces haunted him most. The old woman in the fen, her eyes pleading even as the flames rose. The young boy on the rack, his words twisted by agony. The mother condemned on her daughter's testimony. In daylight, the hunter could don his mask of duty. But in the quiet hours of the night, those faces rose before him. The nightmares began after the Pendle trials. At first, rare. A flicker of memory, a half-formed image in restless sleep. But they grew more vivid with time. Dreams of dark forests, of accusing voices, of hands grasping from the shadows. Waking, the hunter would lie still, heart pounding, unsure for a moment where he was. The cold stone of a cell? A gallows field? Or his own rough pallet by the roadside? He said nothing of these dreams to others. Hunters did not confess weakness, but he knew he was not alone. At rare gatherings of his trade chance meetings on the road, brief exchanges in distant towns, he heard the same weariness in other voices, the same shadow dives. The work left its mark on all who walked this path. The hunter's ledger became more than a record of cases. It was a place to set down thoughts you could not speak aloud. Lines of doubt, of guilt, questions without answers. It brought some small relief, though it could not silence the dreams. There were times when he thought of leaving the work, riding away, vanishing into some far-off place where the witch hunts held no sway. But the summons would always come, another letter, another case, and the hunter, bound by duty and fear, would take up his satchel once more. The road offered no escape, only the endless cycle of fear, accusation, and judgment. The hunter pressed on, but each mile grew heavier. The burden of guilt, once a faint whisper, had become a constant companion. In our next chapter, we will turn to the decline of this dark age, the slow unraveling of fear and superstition, and the dawn of new ways of thinking. Change, when it finally came, arrived not with a crash of sudden truth, but slowly, as if through a fog lifting in the morning light. The hunter had spent years walking roads marked by fear. He had watched neighbors turn on neighbors, families torn apart, innocent creatures destroyed. And while he still answered each new summons, he could not ignore the signs that the world was beginning to shift beneath his feet. At first, the change was subtle. A magistrate here or there, more hesitant to give swift orders. A priest whose sermon spoke less of witches and more of mercy. Small things, easily missed by those not watching for them. But the hunter, whose work demanded he read the moods of men, saw them clearly. There were reasons for this change. New voices were rising, writers, men of reason who questioned the old ways. They argued that sickness came from poor air or foul water, not from curses. That madness was an illness of the mind, not the mark of the devil. Their words spread slowly through pamphlets, through conversation in the halls of power. At the same time, the great trials of past years had begun to leave a bitter taste. Too many innocents condemned. Too many cases built on weak evidence. People began to remember those faces, to wonder if justice had truly been served. The hunter heard these murmurs in village taverns, saw them in the wary glances of magistrates no longer so eager to press charges. In one town, he was called to investigate a series of strange deaths. The old fears flared, accusations flew. But this time, the magistrate hesitated. He sought second opinions. The local physician, newly trained in the latest thinking, suggested natural causes. The case, once destined for the gallows, quietly faded. The hunter, though bound to his task, felt a flicker of relief. He found, too, that the villagers themselves were changing. Fewer came forward with wild stories. Fewer pressed him to act quickly. Fear remained, it always would, but it was tempered now by doubt, by the slow dawn of reason. The hunter wondered if the work that had consumed his life would soon pass into history. The malleus, once carried proudly, now remained more often in his satchel. Its pages felt heavier with each passing year, its certainties less sure. The hunter found himself reading other works, seeking new answers. And though he would never fully escape the shadows of his past, he began to hope that others might. One evening, in the fading light of an autumn day, the hunter rode past a village where once he had led an inquiry. The fields were quiet, the people going about their work. No one looked up as he passed. No whispers followed him. He realized with a slow, deep breath that they no longer feared him as they once had. And in that moment, a weight he had carried for years seemed to ease, if only slightly. The age of the witch hunts was ending. Slowly, unevenly, but surely. A new world was rising, one where reason might triumph over superstition. The hunter would not see its full dawn, but he could feel it coming. And for the first time in many years, he allowed himself a small hope that no more names would be added to his ledger, and that no more innocent lives would be lost to the darkness of fear.
Chapter 9. The hunter no longer drew the crowds he once had. Years earlier, his arrival in a village would have been cause for hush and worry, a ripple of unease spreading down every lane. He was more often met with polite silence or quiet confusion. Some no longer even recognized what he was. The world was changing, and his place in it had become less certain. He still received letters, still followed the road to distant towns when summoned, but the work had softened, or perhaps it had thinned. The fever that once gripped entire communities, the desperation to find a scapegoat for every misfortune, was cooling. Accusations still happened, but they came slower, less boldly. Often they were met with hesitation, even resistance. The hunter knew that he should feel relieved, and in many ways he did. But the change also left a strange emptiness. His life had been shaped by this work, by the chase, the process, the rituals of investigation and judgment. Without that, what remained? The nights were quieter now, but not easier. Doubt had been with him for years. Now it had room to grow. He began keeping to himself more, arriving and leaving without drawing notice. There were no more grand inquiries, no more sweeping confessions that moved entire villages. Instead, he was asked to review small matters, an illness that seemed strange, an argument between neighbors that had taken a bitter turn. That these were not the shadows he once chased, but they were all that remained. One such case brought him to a town nestled in the foothills of the south. It was early spring, the snow just beginning to melt. The letter had been brief. A woman accused of witchcraft was being held after a stillbirth in the village. Her neighbors whispered that she had cursed the child. When the hunter arrived, the streets were muddy but quiet. Children played near the church. The blacksmith nodded without fear. The magistrate, a man younger than the hunter had expected, welcomed him with measured formality and offered tea instead of ale. The woman was kept, not in a cell, but in a small guest house under watch. The hunter found her sitting beside a fire, mending a shirt. She was thin, pale from worry, but calm. Her husband sat nearby, his face worn from sleepless nights. They told their story in clear voices. The child had died in the womb. There had been complications. No curses, no odd behavior, no hidden charms, only grief. The midwife, a respected woman in the village, had vouched for them. But a neighbor, bitter over a boundary dispute, had begun spreading stories. It hadn't taken much. The old fears still lingered. The magistrate, uncertain, had called for the hunter. He spoke with each of them quietly, carefully. He visited the midwife, inspected the grounds, searched for any sign of the tools he once knew so well. There were none. And after a full day, he sat with the magistrate and told him plainly, there was no case, no witchcraft, no crime, only sorrow. The magistrate nodded, clearly relieved. He released the woman that evening. The villagers returned to their routines, and the hunter, though unneeded, stayed one more night. He sat by the hearth of a small inn, drinking broth and listening to the wind move through the trees. In the morning, he walked the muddy road alone. The sky was clear, the sun soft against his shoulders. He thought of all the places he had been, the names he had written, the fires he had watched burn. And he felt something stir in him, kind of mourning. Not for the trials, not for the cruelty, but for the years lost to them. He knew now that most of the people he had condemned had been innocent. Caught in the wrong place, at the wrong time, with the wrong habits, or the wrong enemies. And he had helped tear their lives apart. Even as the world moved on, those memories stayed. His ledger, once thick with new names, had grown thin. He kept it always. A record, a reminder. In his own way, a memorial.
The change had begun, but it was far from complete. Even as scholars argued and courts hesitated, the old fears still lived in the hearts of many. The hunter saw it with each new town he passed through. The words on the lips of a farmer after a poor harvest, the sideways glances at an old woman who kept to herself. The fear had simply gone quiet, waiting. The hunter summons became rarer, but they never truly stopped. And when they did come, it was often in places where time seemed to stand still. Isolated villages, far from the growing cities. Places where the sermons still rang with warnings of the devil's work, and where the people clung to the old ways. He remembered one such place well, a fishing village along a gray coast. The people there lived hard lives, shaped by the wind and the sea. A string of drownings had stirred the old fears. 3 young men lost to a sudden storm. The survivors spoke of unnatural waves, of lights seen beneath the water. An old woman, long mistrusted, was soon named. The hunter rode in with little hope of reason. The magistrate, though respectful, was clearly uneasy. The priest spoke in dark tones of evil beneath the waves. The people gathered in tight knots, their faces closed. The hunter questioned, searched, found no proof, but the tide had already turned. They demanded justice. The hunter urged caution. The magistrate delayed. But by nightfall, the crowd had taken matters into their own hands. He stood helpless as the mob dragged the old woman to the beach. No trial, no sentence, only fury. She vanished beneath the waves, and the village returned to uneasy silence. The hunter left the next morning, the memory of her face sharp in his mind. It would stay with him for years. Such moments reminded him how fragile the new ways were. Reason was rising, yes, but fear was patient. One failed crop, one sickness, one tragedy, and the old beliefs flared again. The hunter knew it would take more than new books and cautious magistrates to banish them. It would take time. Generations, perhaps. He saw this struggle play out in the towns as well. In the growing cities, the scholars and merchants spoke openly against the hunts. They dismissed the Malleus as relic, its teachings as superstition. Yet even there, the common folk clung to old stories. The hunter heard them in market stalls, in taverns after dark. Whispers of witches still at work, of hidden packs, of unexplained misfortunes. The words were softer now, but no less dangerous, and so he continued his work, quieter now, less certain. He advised caution, urged reason. When he could, he helped prevent the worst. In some places, he found allies, judges, priests, even common folk who saw the truth as he had come to see it. In others, he could only watch, powerless as fear claimed another victim. In time, the hunter came to understand that he was part of a fading world. His trade was built on fear, and fear was being pushed slowly back by knowledge. But the battle was not yet won. The ghosts of the past walked still, in every whisper, in every glance. The hunter knew he would not live to see them fully banished. But perhaps others would, and so he kept to the road. Fewer summons, yes. But he answered them still, in case reason needed a voice. And in his ledger, he continued to write not just names, now, but thoughts, hopes, regrets. A record of a life spent chasing shadows, in the hope that one day no one else would need to. In our next chapter, we will turn to the shifting life of the hunter himself, as he moved between the fading old world and the uncertain dawn of a new one. Chapter 10. The road was quieter now. Fewer summons came, fewer faces turned toward him in fear or expectation. The hunter felt the change with each passing season. Where once he had been a figure of grim authority, now he was a curiosity or a man out of step with his time. In many towns, the work of witch hunting had nearly stopped. The new magistrates were men of learning, wary of old ways. The younger priests spoke of forgiveness more than judgment. The age of fear was fading. For the hunter, the change brought both relief and uncertainty. He had spent his life in service to a cause that was now crumbling. His skills, once so valued, were no longer called for in the same way. The ledger in his pack grew thinner with each passing year. The Malleus, once open nightly, remained shut for weeks at a time. He spent more time on the road between distant villages, seeking signs of who he might become without this work. But the road, long a place of duty and dread, offered few answers. The inns where he once found wary respect now offered little more than passing glances. The merchants and farmers spoke of new troubles, taxes, war, poor harvests, but rarely of witches. The old fears were giving way to new concerns. And yet, in some corners of the land, the shadows remained. The hunter still found villages where the sermons rang with fire and warning, where the old stories were passed from parent to child. In those places, the summons still came. The hunter answered, though with a heavier heart. He no longer rode with the same grim certainty. Each case was weighed more carefully, each accusation examined with greater doubt. He questioned more, pressed harder for truth, sought to prevent injustice rather than merely deliver it. The work had become quieter, more cautious, but no less necessary. There were days when he wondered if the change would last. He had seen how quickly fear could return. One harsh winter, one outbreak of plague, one unexplained death, and the old cries would rise again. The hunter knew that the world did not turn in a single moment. It shifted slowly with many false steps. He also wondered what would become of men like him, those trained in the old ways, bound to old duties. Some had already disappeared. Others clung to their titles, blind to the changing winds. The hunter chose another path. He adapted. Quietly, steadily, he shaped his work to fit the new world. Less accusation, more counsel. Less pursuit, more prevention. But always the past remained close. The faces of those he had condemned, the voices of those lost to fear, followed him still. They filled his dreams, shaped his waking thoughts. The hunter carried them with him, a burden he knew would never fully lift, and so he rode on, a figure from a fading age, moving through a land caught between shadow and light. The road stretched before him still, uncertain but familiar. The hunter followed it, not because he was called, but because he could do no other. In our next chapter, we will step into one of those corners where the old fears still ruled, and where the hunter's place in the world would be tested once more. It was deep into autumn when the letter arrived. The hunter had spent weeks without summons, resting in a small town where the winds carried the first hints of winter. He might have remained there through the cold months, but the seal on the parchment was familiar, a magistrate from an isolated region to the east. The letter was brief, the tone urgent, unusual deaths, rising fear, a request for his presence. The hunter prepared slowly. His horse had grown soft from weeks of easy pasture. His own body ached from too much idle time. Yet he felt something stir, a sense of old duty, of unfinished business. He packed his satchel, tightened his cloak, and rode once more into the fading season. The road east wound through thick forests and narrow passes. The air grew colder with each mile. Villages here were smaller, poorer, more cut off from the new ideas spreading in the city. The hunter knew what he would find. Old beliefs, old fears, still strong. He rode carefully, eyes sharp for signs of trouble. The village lay in a narrow valley, gray and still beneath low clouds. Smoke rose from a few chimneys. The fields were half harvested, the work slowed by fear. The magistrate met him at the edge of the square, a thin man, worn with worry. His welcome was stiff, the words few. They walked quickly to the council house. Inside, the story spilled out. 3 deaths in as many weeks. Sudden, unexplained. A child, a young farmer, an old man, all found cold and still in their beds. No marks, no illness. The healer baffled. The priest troubled. The villagers whispered of curses, of witches returned. An old woman, long mistrusted, had already been named. The hunter listened carefully, asking questions the magistrate had not. The healer's report. The condition of the bodies. The history of the accused. He sensed the old patterns at work, a community turning on itself, seeking answers in the past. The magistrate, though uneasy, was under pressure from the people. They wanted action. They wanted the hunter's word. He asked to see the accused. The woman was brought, frail and silent, her eyes sunken with fear. She spoke little, denying all charges. Her home was searched. No charms, no tools of the old craft were found. But in the minds of the villagers, evidence mattered less than suspicion. Too many strange looks, too many old stories. The hunter moved through the village, listening. The people avoided his gaze. The priest, once an ally in such cases, urged caution but offered no defense. The hunter sensed how close the town stood to the edge. One more death, one more whisper, and the mob would act. He weighed his options carefully. A formal inquiry might inflame things further. A public denial could backfire. He chose another path, quiet meetings with key voices, gentle words about caution, about the new thinking from the cities, a warning to the magistrate of the risks of haste. Slowly, quietly, he worked to shift the tide. It was not easy. Days passed in tense silence. Then a traveler brought news of illness in a nearby town, a fever that explained the strange deaths. The healer, emboldened, spoke out. The hunter pressed the point. The magistrate, with growing courage, declared the matter closed. The accused was released. The village settled, though uneasily. The hunter left soon after, knowing the old fears would linger. But for once, no new name was added to his ledger. No life was lost to the shadows. As he rode away, the hunter felt again the strange emptiness of this new world. His work was changing, fading. Yet here, in this place of lingering fear, it had mattered still. He pressed on, unsure what future awaited him, but certain that the road would always call. In our next chapter, we will explore how the hunter's life, shaped by guilt and duty, slowly transformed as he faced the fading of his old world and the uncertain promise of a new one. Chapter 11. The road stretched long and empty before him now. Fewer letters came. The magistrates who once sought his guidance now wrote only with reluctance, if at all. In many towns, his name was no longer known. New generations were rising, shaped by new ideas. The hunter, once so certain of his place, found himself caught between two worlds, one fading, one not yet fully formed. He rode because he knew no other life. The road had shaped him, hardened him. But with each passing season, the burden of guilt grew heavier. The ledger he carried was a constant reminder. Page after page of names, of faces, of lives taken or broken. And though the pages had thinned, the weight never lessened. At first, he had tried to ignore it, to tell himself that he had served a purpose, that he had followed the law. But the dreams would not be silenced. Night after night, they came visions of faces, of voices raised in fear, of fires burning against the dark sky. He woke cold and trembling, the echoes of the past refusing to fade. He began to linger in the villages longer, speaking less of witchcraft and more of healing, of reason. He sought out the younger priests, the learned men who questioned the old ways. In them, he found a faint hope. Perhaps the tide was truly turning. Perhaps the next generation would break the cycle. The hunter also began to help in other ways. He offered counsel in disputes, helped settle quarrels before they turned to accusation. He listened to the fears of the people, not to feed them, but to ease them. Slowly, quietly, he became less a hunter and more a guide, a man who knew the shadows and could help others step away from them. Still, the past was never far. In each new place, he looked for signs of the old fear. A harsh word, a suspicious glance, a sudden illness blamed on unseen forces. He knew how quickly the fire could catch again. His presence alone, he hoped, might be enough to hold it back. He thought often of those he had condemned, of the old woman in the fen, of the boy on the rack, of the mother accused by her own child. Their faces followed him. In his ledger, he began to write their names in a new way, not as cases closed, but as lives remembered. A quiet act of atonement, though he knew it could never be enough. There were moments of peace. A village spared an inquiry. A child's illness cured by simple medicine, not blamed on a neighbor. In these small victories, the hunter found some measure of purpose. The world was changing, slowly, unevenly. And if he could help it along, even in some small way, then perhaps the road he had walked was not entirely in vain. But always the doubts remained. What had his work truly accomplished? How many innocent lives had been lost through his hand? Could he ever be more than a man shaped by guilt? These questions haunted him, unanswered. The hunter rode on, through quiet lanes and bustling towns, a relic of a darker time. The new world was rising, yes, but its dawn was not yet complete. The road still called, and he still answered because he could do no other. In our next chapter, we will follow him deeper into this uncertain world, where old shadows still lingered, and where one final test would shape his fate. Late autumn had settled over the land, the trees bare, their branches black against the sky, the color of stone. The hunter rode through quiet fields, frost crisp beneath his horse's hooves. The villages seemed stiller now, the roads more empty. Word had spread. It seemed that the days of the old hunts were nearly done. Yet fear, though weaker, still lingered in certain places. It was in one of these that the hunter received what would be his final summons, a small hamlet near the western hills. The letter had come not from a magistrate, but from a priest, an older man who had known the hunter in years past. His words were plain. The old fear stirs again. Come if you can. The hunter read the letter by candlelight, its flickering glow casting long shadows across the room. He had thought perhaps to lay down the work for good, yet he could not ignore the call. There was still some part of him that believed he might yet do good. So he packed his satchel once more, mounted his aging horse, and set out toward the hills. The village was small, no more than 24 cottages clustered around a crumbling church. The people met him with wary eyes. Few greeted him openly. The priest, a stooped figure with a face worn by years, welcomed him in silence. Over bread and broth, the story came. A child had vanished in the night. No sign, no trace. Whispers of old tales began to stir. The villagers, desperate for answers, spoke once more of witchcraft. The accused was a widow, known to keep to herself. No evidence, no witness, only fear, sharpened by grief. The hunter listened, the old weight settling on his shoulders. This was the path he knew too well. He resolved to proceed with care. He spoke first to the family of the lost child. Their sorrow was raw, their words frantic. The hunter offered comfort where he could, gentle questions that yielded little. No quarrels with the widow, no clear reason for blame. Yet the villagers, hungry for something to hold on to, pressed harder. The priest, though wise, could not sway them. The hunter met with the widow. Her eyes were tired, her voice quiet but steady. She denied all knowledge, all guilt. The hunter searched her home, no charms, no signs of malice. Only the simple belongings of a life lived in solitude. Days passed. The village grew restless. The child was not found. Old fears rose with each sunset. A council was called. The hunter stood before them, speaking calmly of caution, of the dangers of false judgment. Some listened, others would not. Voices rose. The hunter saw the old pattern beginning again. That night, he walked the lanes of the village, thinking, the world had changed, yes, but not enough. In places such as this, the shadows still waited. If he left now, he knew what would happen. The widow would be taken. Another name added to a long list. At dawn, he gathered the villagers, spoke to them of his years on the road, of the many he had seen wrongly condemned. He held nothing back, not even his own guilt. The words were heavy, but honest. Slowly they seemed to take root. The crowd quieted. The old priest stood beside him, lending his voice. By day's end, the mood had shifted. The widow remained free. The search for the child turned outward, toward the forests and streams. The hunter had held back the tide, for now. But the cost showed in his face and the weariness of his step. He stayed one more night, then rode on. The road stretched ahead, uncertain as ever, but within him, something had eased. He had done what he could, this time, and though the ghosts of the past remained, he carried them with a steadier heart. The age of the witch hunts was passing, slowly but surely. And so too, perhaps, was the time of the hunter. In our next chapter, we will turn to the lingering fears that remained in the land, and the quiet ways in which old superstitions still shaped the lives of the people. Chapter 12. Though the great hunts had faded, though magistrates now spoke with caution and priests preached temperance, the old fears did not vanish. They merely sank beneath the surface into the quiet rhythms of daily life. The hunter saw in every village he passed. The words were softer now, spoken only in hushed tones, but they remained. A broken wheel, a sickly child, an unexpected storm, still these things stirred whispers of unseen forces at work. In many ways, the people clung to these old beliefs because they offered something the new thinking did not. A reason, however dark, for life's hardships. The land was still hard, winters still long. Crops still failed. Disease still crept unseen into cottages. It was easier, in some ways, to believe in curses than in random misfortune. Easier to blame a single person than to accept a world governed by chance and fate. The hunter, though he no longer rode as often in official service, could not stop seeing these shadows. A glance exchanged over a market stall. An old woman's lonely figure avoided on a village lane. The hush that fell when certain names were spoken. He had once built his life on these signs, reading them as proofs of guilt. Now he saw them for what they were, echoes of old fear, given shape by weary hearts. In one town, he paused at an inn where the fire burned low and the ale flowed freely. The talk was of taxes, of war abroad, of the king's court, but beneath it in quieter voices came the stories. A cow gone barren, a fisherman's nets come up empty, and always the old explanations followed close behind. The hunter listened, unseen in the corner. It was no longer his place to speak, but the stories weighed on him all the same. He remembered a village in the hills where, even now, a certain house stood empty. Its last occupant, a healer, once blamed for a child's death, had been driven away years before. No one would live there still. The roof sagged. The door hung loose. The children were told not to go near. Such was the long shadow of old superstition. There were still places, too, where charms were left at doorways, where iron nails were driven into lintels, where certain herbs were hung in rafters to ward off ill luck. The hunter no longer scoffed at such things. He understood them now. They were not signs of malice, but of fear that reason alone could not yet ease. He often wondered what would come of these lingering beliefs. Would they fade in time, lost to the new ways of thought? Or would they shift, change shape, find new life in other fears? The hunter could not say. He only knew that the work of true healing, the mending of hearts and minds, would take far longer than the ending of the hunts themselves. For himself, he had chosen a quieter life, The road still called, but less often. When he rode now, it was not in pursuit of witches, but in search of understanding. He sought the places where the old ways still held sway, hoping to ease them, if only a little. He spoke quietly to those who would listen, not of guilt and punishment, but of hope and reason. And in his ledger, he kept writing. Not cases now, but thoughts. Stories of what he saw, hopes for a better future. It was not much, perhaps, but it was what he could offer. In our next chapter, we will turn to the rare places where the old fears still burned hot, and where the hunter would face the last, most dangerous echoes of his former life.
Not every village was willing to let go of the old ways. Though the great hunts had faded, though magistrates grew wary and priests preached caution, there remained pockets of the land where fear still ruled. Places where the dark stories had never fully dimmed, where the people clung to old hatreds as fiercely as to their faith. The hunter had long known of such places. They called to him now, not through summons or letters, but through word of mouth, through travelers' tales overheard in distant inns. Through the warnings of those few who still trusted him, he rode into one such place, one bitter winter, drawn by rumor more than duty. A town high in the northern hills, isolated by forest and stone. The journey was long, the roads harsh with snow. His horse struggled through drifts. Ice hung from bare branches, like shards of glass. The hunter pressed on. Something in the tales had stirred old instincts. The village was as he expected, small, insular, untouched by the shifting winds of thought that now moved through the cities. The people eyed him with open suspicion. No welcome met him. The air was thick with tension. It did not take long to learn why. A child had fallen ill, a wasting sickness, unexplained. The healer's herbs had failed. Priest's prayers had brought no change. The people had turned instead to old fears. The name of an old man had been spoken a recluse, long mistrusted. He had been seized, held in the church's cold cellar. The hunter, though unbidden, asked to see him. The priest, an old man himself, weary and unsure, granted the request. By flickering torchlight, the hunter descended the stone steps. The accused lay in a corner, thin and shivering. He spoke in whispers, confused, denying all guilt. The hunter questioned him gently, saw no malice, no signs of the old craft, only fear. He emerged to find the village already stirring toward violence. A pyre was being built at the edge of the square. The people would not wait for a trial. The hunter moved quickly, speaking first to the priest, then to the town's elders. He warned of the danger of the shame such an act would bring. Some wavered, others held fast to the old ways. The hunter knew the moment was fragile. That night he walked the snowy lanes, speaking softly where he could, sowing doubt among the younger folk, urging the priest to stand firm. The cold wind bit at his face, the stars sharp above. By dawn, the pyre still stood, but no fire had been lit. The town remained on the edge, swaying between fear and reason. The child worsened. Yet even in their grief, the people hesitated. The hunter's words, the priest's quiet counsel, had found some hold. Then, on the third day, the child rallied slowly, faintly, but enough. The sickness broke, the tide turned. The old man was freed, though few dared meet his eyes. The hunter left without ceremony, the snow falling thick behind him. He rode hard from that place, knowing how close the past had come to rising again. These were the last dangerous echoes of his former life, the final tests of the path he had chosen. He had faced them this time, but he knew others would come. Fear was not so icily killed, merely slept, waiting for the next shadow to awaken it. Yet even so, the hunter rode with a steadier heart. He had seen the change at work, even in that hard place. The shift would not be swift, nor complete in his lifetime, but it had begun. And that perhaps was enough. In our next chapter, we will turn to the quieter days of the hunter's later years, as the road grew longer, the summons fewer, and the world slowly left behind the age of witches.
Chapter 30. The winter seemed colder in his later years, the roads longer. His horse, once young and strong, now moved with a slower step. The hunter felt the change in himself as well aching joints, a weariness that lingered long after a night's rest. He had lived on the road for decades, moving from one fearful village to the next. Now the road lay mostly empty before him. The summons had all but stopped. Once, he would receive several in a season requests from magistrates, pleas from priests. Now, months passed in silence. The world had moved on. The great hunts were over. The courts no longer welcomed his kind. New laws discouraged the old trials. Reason, it seemed, had finally begun to take root. And yet the hunter rode still. It was not duty that kept him to the road now, nor any promise of coin. It was something older, deeper, the knowledge that in some places old fears remained, and the hope that even without a summons he might yet do some good. He had no home to return to, no family waiting. His life had been shaped by this work, and he had never allowed himself ties beyond it. The road was all he knew. The inns where he stayed recognized him less often now. Fewer faces remembered the dark-cloaked hunter of past years. He was becoming a shadow of a shadow, a man fading with the passing of his age. Yet he watched with quiet satisfaction as the land changed. In the market towns, he heard open talk of science and reason. New books were read by candlelight treatises on medicine, on the natural world. The old fears still whispered, but more softly now, beneath the hum of new knowledge. In the smaller villages, the change was slower. There, the old ways clung more stubbornly to the corners of life. But even there, the great fires had gone cold. The gallows stood empty. The witch stones lay forgotten beneath moss. The hunter saw in these things the measure of the world's turning. He began to write more often in his ledger. Not cases, those were few now, but reflections. Memories of the lives he had touched, the faces he could not forget. His own doubts and regrets. The dreams that still haunted him, though they came less sharply now. There were times and quiet moments by a lonely hearth when he wondered what his life might have been had he chosen another path. A farmer, perhaps. A scholar. But such thoughts led nowhere. The road had shaped him. He had played his part for better or... He could only hope that, in the end, the balance of harm and help might lean toward the latter. He grew slower in the saddle, rested more often. But still, when word came a whisper of trouble in some distant place, he would ride. Not with the grim certainty of his youth, but with a quiet resolve. If he could spare even one life from the old terror, that would be enough. It was late in the year when the word reached him, carried not by official letter, but by the mouth of a traveling peddler. A distant village, barely more than a scatter of cottages, had seen strange lights in the woods, a run of poor fortune. The people spoke again of witches. There had been no formal summons, no seal, no coin promised. But the hunter knew what such whispers could become if left unanswered. He packed his few belongings, saddled his old horse with a gentler hand than in years past, and set out. The ride was slow, the road rough with frost. His joints ached with each mile, yet he pressed on. There was a kind of peace in the journey itself, a rhythm he had known all his life. The village lay in a hollow between two hills, wrapped in mist. The hunter arrived as evening fell, the cold air sharp in his lungs. The people watched him with suspicion, but no hostility. They knew of him, it seemed some echo of old tales. Soft now was time. He found lodging in a quiet room above the tavern. The keeper, a woman of middle years, offered broth and bread without question. The hunter listened, asked careful questions. The lights in the woods, the failed crops, the illness that had touched a few households, none of it strange to his ear. Yet fear had begun to stir. A few names had been whispered. An old widow, a young man who lived alone. The hunter moved through the village the next day, speaking softly, observing. The signs were clear. The people were uneasy but not yet driven to act. There was still time. He called upon the priest, a young man with clear eyes, wary of the old ways. Together they spoke with the elders, urging patience, caution. That evening, by the fire, the hunter gathered those willing to listen. He spoke not of devils and curses, but of the dangers of fear, of the lives lost in other places, in other years, of the hard lessons learned. His voice, though worn, still carried weight. The room grew quiet, the days passed, the mist lifted. The lights in the woods faded, perhaps will-o'-the-wisps, perhaps no more than a trick of moonlight on damp leaves. The fears slowly began to ebb. The hunter stayed on a few days more, offering quiet counsel, helping the village turn back from the edge. When he finally rode out, the frost was heavier. His breath rose in white clouds. The road stretched long and cold ahead. Yet in his heart there was a certain stillness. The old terror had been held at bay once more, not by force, but by words. By reason? It was not a victory, not in the grand sense. But it was enough, a life spared, perhaps several. In his ledger, he wrote of it simply, a good ending. The hunter knew his time was drawing short. His strength waned. The road grew harder with each mile. Yet he would ride while he could. Not for glory nor for duty, but for the quiet hope that the world might yet turn fully from its darker past. In our next chapter, we will step into those final days of the hunter's life, as he comes to terms with his long journey and the shadows he leaves behind. Chapter 14. The hunter's final days came quietly, not in the heat of a trial or the clamor of a frightened crowd, but in the slow passing of seasons. He no longer kept to the road as before. His horse, too old for long journeys, grazed in a small paddock outside a modest inn where the hunter had taken to staying through the colder months. The innkeeper, a kind woman who had heard the old stories, gave him a small room with a view of the hills. There, by a narrow window, the hunter spent his days, writing in his ledger, watching the land shift from autumn to winter. He wrote only when word of need truly reached him, and even then, more often to offer counsel than to confront. The villages knew him now more as a relic of another age than a figure of fear. The children whispered of the old witch hunter, the man who had seen strange things, who had walked with shadows. Some were curious. A few brave ones would approach him in the market, wide-eyed, asking if the old tales were true. The hunter answered with a soft smile, a shake of the head, and gentle words that spoke more of reason than of dark forces. He knew his time was passing. The world had changed, and rightly so. The old courts were gone. The Malleus, once a guide for every judge and priest, now gathered dust on forgotten shelves. The new scholars spoke of science, of natural causes. The fear of witches had not vanished entirely, but it no longer ruled the land. In quiet moments, the hunter reflected on all he had seen. The faces haunted him, still the condemned, the innocent, the broken, the screams of the rack, the smoke of the pyres. He had once believed he served justice. Now he knew how fragile that justice had been, how easily twisted by fear. His ledger had grown into something more than a record of cases. It was now a chronicle of lessons, of regrets, of hopes for the future. He wrote not to excuse himself, but to remember. There were still nights when dreams came, faces from the past, voices calling through the mist. But they no longer gripped him with the same terror. Age had dulled the edges of guilt, though it had not erased it. He accepted it now as part of himself, as much as the scars on his hands, the ache in his bones. The hunter found a kind of peace in simple things. The warmth of a hearth, the laughter of children playing in the square, the quiet talk of farmers in the fields. Life moved on, slow but steady, and he was content to watch it unfold. In time, fewer remembered him as the hunter of witches. He became instead the old man who spoke wisely of reason, who counseled patience, who told stories of a past best left behind. He had no need for fame, no wish for recognition. The road had taught him humility. And so, as the final winter deepened, the hunter remained in his small room, the ledger open before him, the quill resting in a weary hand. The shadows outside grew long, but within there was a quiet light, a life of hard lessons now at rest. In our final chapter, we will close this journey looking back on the world the hunter helped to leave behind, and the hopes he carried for those who would walk the road after him. The last snows had melted, and the first buds of spring showed on the bare branches when the hunter's road quietly came to an end. No great trial marked the close of his life. No final summons or grand farewell. Only the soft passing of time, the turning of the seasons, and the quiet acceptance of a man who had carried too much for too long. He had written much in his final weeks, the ledger filling with pages of reflection. He wrote of the faces he remembered, of the villages he had known, of the terrible weight of fear, and of the slow rise of reason. He wrote of guilt, yes, but also of hope that the world might not return to the dark paths he had once helped to tread. There was no family to mourn him, no heirs to carry on his name. But there were those in the village who had come to care for him in his final days, the innkeeper, her sons, the young priest who had often sat by his side and listened to the old stories. They found him one morning in his chair by the window, the ledger closed on the table, his eyes forever turned toward the soft light of the hills. Word of his passing spread slowly, carried more by memory than by record. To many in the wider world, he was already forgotten, his work a relic of a darker time. But in the small towns where he had walked his last years, his story lived on, not as the hunter of witches, but as a man who had sought, at the end, to mend what had been broken. The ledger passed to the young priest, who read it carefully and with growing understanding. In its pages, he found not the harsh certainties of the old hunts, but a testament to change, to doubt, to the long struggle between fear and reason. In time, those writings would help guide others quietly, without fame or acclaim, but with steady purpose. And so the hunter's life ended not in fire or fear, but in the slow unfolding of a new age. The world he left behind was not free of superstition, nor wholly safe from the old shadows. But it was a world moving forward, learning from the past. And in that, the hunter's long road had not been in vain. As spring warmed the land, the innkeeper planted wildflowers by the edge of the path where the hunter had so often stood, gazing toward the horizon. The blooms swayed gently in the breeze, their colors bright against the green. Travelers who passed might pause there, some knowing, some not, of the man who had once ridden those roads in the name of justice, and who had come at last to understand its cost. And so we close this journey with the hope that the shadows of fear will not again take such deep root, that the lessons hard won will not be forgotten, and that reason and compassion will guide those who walk the road ahead. The story of the witch hunter is in many ways a story of human nature itself, of fear and belief, of justice and failure, of change that comes slowly, painfully, and at great cost. Though the hunter's road has ended, the questions his life leaves behind remain as important now as ever. How do we guard against fear when it twists into hatred? How do we ensure that justice is shaped by truth, not by panic? How do we learn from the mistakes of the past and carry those lessons forward? The world the hunter left behind was no longer ruled by the terrible fury of the hunts. The courts had turned away from the old ways. The malleus lay forgotten on dusty shelves, science, reason, and compassion were rising. Yet the hunter knew, and we should remember, that human nature changes slowly. Fear still lives in the corners of the mind. Suspicion can still bloom in hard times. The faces may change, the names may change, but the old patterns can return if we let them. It was in this understanding that the hunter found his purpose in his later years, not to punish, but to guide, not to chase shadows, but to offer light. His story is not only one of guilt, though there was much of that. It is also a story of redemption, of one man trying to set right, in whatever small way he could, the harm he had once helped cause. And perhaps that is the truest legacy of the hunter's life. Not the cases he closed, not the trials he attended, but the quiet, determined effort to leave the world better than he had found it. In his final years, in the simple acts of kindness and wisdom, in the pages of his ledger passed to younger hands, he helped turn the course of history a little further from darkness and toward the light. For us, looking back on this time from the comfort of a different age, this story serves as a reminder. Progress is never guaranteed. It must be protected, nurtured, renewed in every generation. The witch hunts of the 17th century may seem distant now, but they were born of human emotions that remain with us. Fear of the unknown, mistrust of the different, the temptation to seek easy answers for hard problems. And so, as we reflect on the hunter's road, we might ask ourselves, what fears rule us now? What superstitions do we still carry? And how can we, in our own lives, help ensure that justice and compassion remain stronger than fear? And in the soft dawn of the modern world, the hunter glimpsed at the end of his life, we can find hope. Hope that reason will continue to grow, that old mistakes will not be repeated, that the hard-won lessons of the past will guide us. And in the quiet memory of one man's long, difficult journey, we are reminded that even in the darkest times, change is possible, that redemption is possible, and that each of us, in small ways, can help bend the road of history toward the good. In our final closing segment, we will settle gently from this long journey, easing the mind and reflecting once more on the comfort of the present moment so that you may rest in peace tonight, far from those troubled days. Thank you for joining us tonight here on The Drowsy Historian. If you enjoyed this quiet journey through the past, please consider subscribing and leaving a like. It helps us bring you more peaceful stories. Until next time, sleep well and good night.